Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Unleash, the panel discussion show on the Walkout Network, where it has definitely been a weird week or two out there, and I am excited to dive into it with our celebrity panel. First of all, let's welcome our special guest joining us this evening. It is none other than Mr. Dave Doyle of MMA Junkie. Dave, how are you doing?
All things considered, I think I'm doing all right. How about you guys?
All things considered, doing all right is a really good way to put it. And I'm sure we'll dive into it. Our panel is anchored as usual by the man with the facts, the stats, and the numbers. Sherdog Associate Editor Jay Petrie. Jay, how are you doing?
You know, I'm doing. I think that's the best way to say. I'm doing like the rest of us, like the little one, the fifth member of the panel right here is expressing what we're all feeling inside because of everything that's been happening this week. So I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. The stat of the week is 0, which is the number of major events for the next month. So there are no major events in any promotions. Cage Warriors is not quite a major. It's a regional British promotion. As of a couple hours ago, they're still holding a show. But yeah, 0 major events for the next month.
And didn't they pull a fast one and just move it from London
Sneaky.
to a closed gym somewhere else in the UK?
Like 200 miles away.
Yeah, probably by this time tomorrow, they're going to be announcing that they're looking for like a barge on the North Sea where they can hold it. Yeah.
Cage Warrior channel fights.
And our normal host, as you can see but not hear, is here, Mr. Ant Walker, the founder of the Walkout Network, joined by young Adonis. And how are you doing, Ant?
I am struggling right now. I am substitute mommy. I am worthless. I'm pathetic, according to my normally very peaceful and kind son Adonis. So I'm taking care of him. This is a quarantine style podcast as Los Angeles County is on the verge of a full scale quarantine. So get used to it. Get used to Adonis. Get used to this on the Walkout Network. It's the new reality, baby. Let's get this work.
Sweet. All right, let's jump right in. First question for the panel, and I'll start with Dave. And I have the feeling I know the answer to this question because I read your op-ed this week, but if you were the president of the UFC, would you have put on the Brasilia show on Saturday?
Yeah, no. If I was the president of the UFC, I would have taken the route that Adam Silver took. Like the moment it became clear that this was serious business, that this was jeopardizing the health and safety of fighters, fans, staff, everyone involved with this process. It was very telling that the NBA just had, as soon as one player on the Utah Jazz, exactly, it was over with. The entire league was shut down, and then within 24 hours, everyone else followed suit, pretty much except for the UFC. So no, I would like to think that if I was in that position, that I would have said, hey, this is a terrible thing that's going on. My fighters' health and safety are at risk. My staff is at risk. Let's shut this down. Let's make sure that everyone lives to fight healthy another day, so to speak. So, no, I would not have continued with UFC Brasilia.
Do you have any different perspective or anything to add to that, Jay?
You know, if I were Dana White, I would have run that with fans in the audience. Are you kidding? How could this be a thing? Bellator postponed on the day of the event for this past Friday, Bellator 241, and this was kind of a shock because they had gone through the steps to make it a closed arena event, and we just got, I think it was a report today that I read that potentially it was closed because there was a staff member or venue personnel, or maybe it was a Bellator member, I don't know exactly who it was, tested positive for the coronavirus in the venue. So like, okay, we're done here. If that's what it took to cancel that, then I'm almost surprised. However, this is we like to make jokes about pettyweight champion Scott Coker, but this is one example that Scott Coker nailed it, because Scott Coker, the president of Bellator, paid every fighter on Bellator 241 their show and win money. We're reading, and I think it was Ricky Simone that posted this, they're not getting paid for the canceled fights for the UFC. We'll get into that. And so some fighters were signing up to be paid. But if I were the president of the UFC, I would have canceled the event and I would have paid the fighters the money, because, it wasn't any of their fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. But it needed to not happen. And it happened. And I'm concerned. I hope that nobody tested positive because the event was held last week.
And testing positive is kind of a side issue here, because the last I heard, the fighters were not tested.
No.
So if any of them take sick this weekend, we're now wondering, who might have picked it up from them, or whom they might have picked it up from that is asymptomatic. Because the whole thing about stupid ass Rudy Gobert is that the NBA quickly did the math and said, you know what? Every single player in the league has at least come in indirect contact with him in the last 4 weeks. We've got to pull the plug. It would be pretty easy.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I feel like in a weird way, I kind of have to defend Rudy Gobert, just to the extent that even though he was a complete dumbass, right? If he had not been that complete of a dumbass, we might have gone on. We, as a society, might have just carried on several more days of people infecting each other, games going on. Like, that was the NBA shutting down was the move that kind of made everyone go, whoa, and kind of spiraled, where we are now, where restaurants and bars and everything are shut down. So I'm going to defend Gobert to that extent. I might be going off on a tangent there, but that's been in my head for a while.
No, it's a good point.
No, that's a fair tangent to go on. Sorry, Adonis is weighing in too. But the thing is, this is one of those things where, like, people almost need to be scared into doing the right thing.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, the UFC hasn't seemed to realize that you have to take extreme measures to keep this contained. And maybe if a UFC fighter or a staff member tested positive for coronavirus, and the fact that we don't have enough tests is a whole nother subject, maybe then it would actually be something that says, like, hey, let's do something different. And I know we'll go into this, so I'll temper it just by saying, if I were the UFC president, if I were in charge, and maybe saying the UFC president isn't fair. Maybe if to say I'm one of the heads of Endeavor, I would be shutting this down simply because this is bigger than a fist fight in a cage. This is a public health situation. I think all these fighters have young children. They have older grandparents. They have older parents. They have a brother or a sister with an autoimmune disorder. What you're saying by having these fights going on is the hell with their families.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that if you're a world-class athlete and you're on the UFC stage, I'm sure Kevin Lee is a healthy enough guy to where if he got this, he would be fine in the end. But I don't know about his family. Is it worth the risk? Are you just giving a middle finger to Kevin Lee's family now by saying, oh, these fights have to go on because this is all that matters?
Yep.
And I don't know if you saw it on Twitter earlier today, but Dan Ige said that he was really sick before his last fight, and he's wondering if he had, untested for coronavirus back then, considering how long that this is all been we're just catching up on the testing now. So if you think about, let's say as a thought example here, that Dan Ige did have coronavirus, went through his fight week, was in contact with all the UFC staff. I remember we interviewed him at MMA Junkie, where you guys
contact with me,
shook his hand.
Right? There you go. So that's just one example of, how easily this can spread, how many people might, maybe you guys caught it, were asymptomatic, but passed it on to someone else. We don't know. We don't know enough about this situation. And to get back to the original question, that's why it was so goddamn irresponsible to go on with UFC Brasilia on Saturday.
And it's a good point. It's a point I want to kind of circle back around to, that the CAB MMA, the Brazilian Athletic Commission, specifically stated they will not be testing their athletes. None of them will be tested prior to the event. And the UFC didn't say, we got this. No, they didn't. Fighters would have let us, and it's kind of a tough argument to make because I don't have firsthand knowledge that the UFC ran tests, but I'll put it this way. Fighters would have said they were tested. Not a single fighter even mentioned it, even alluded it. It was nothing. And that hurts.
Fighters shut up about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, immediately. On Instagram, on Twitter, and everywhere. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we see. Who was it? Somebody said, a fighter on Twitter today said, "Hey, USADA, you're coming to test my blood. You got a coronavirus test with me?"
Awesome. Yeah.
Let's not forget. This is one thing that I find really kind of hilarious here. So, Chatri Sitchachong, head of One Championship, announced kind of before a lot of this broke out in the U.S. and all the panic that he was closed during all the One Championship shows, and of course it appears that in Asia they've got a pretty good containment on it now, and they look to be on the other side of this. But here's one bit of irony. We get on here and we trash Dave Feldman every chance we get because BKFC is a joke. But he postponed a BKFC event while the UFC was persisting. When Dave Feldman and Chatri Sitchachong are the voices of reason, we have lost all hope. This is ridiculous. This is insanity. BKFC ahead of the UFC, insanity.
Whew.
Can't say much more than that. My list of questions is over 12 hours old, and this kind of set of stories is moving so quickly that I need to ask if there's been an update. Is the UFC still saying they're going to try to run this show this Saturday? Anyone know?
No,
It's
okay. It's dead now.
The show's through April 11th.
Okay. All right. I saw that story. Okay. Go ahead.
Dana made an announcement this afternoon that those 3 shows are canceled. He went on ESPN. The next layer to this, to me, which is just the funniest, maybe fun, morbidly funny is the word, is that in their efforts to try to save UFC London, they were going to move the show to something called Fire Lake Arena on the Indian Reservation in Oklahoma. So what you have now is that the UFC, the company, now granted, it's not, the Fertittas don't own things anymore, but Dana White's still the same front man who spent all these years going, the old owners ran from regulation. We run to government regulation, was literally going to an Indian reservation in the middle of nowhere to escape the fact that the Nevada Athletic Commission wasn't going to let them run their plans to go ahead with their plans to continue their insane attempts to continue with their schedule. It's just, I don't know, like life comes full circle all the time, I guess.
And it's funny because Fire Lake was from, Invicta had a show there early on. So it's not the first time, but yeah, UFC Fire Lake was coming at us fast. Wow.
And then the next kind of step in all this is that Dana also said that he's insisting that Tony versus Khabib is going to happen, with April 18th being the next that has been removed. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe we can just take Ant off of mute and have his kid cry, and that can represent what we're all thinking about Khabib versus Tony right now. But I can't imagine who's going to sanction them, what country they would go to do this, whether testing can be put in place between now and then. I'm kind of flabbergasted. I don't know how they pull this off.
Hashtag UFC yacht in international waters. That's the only thing left. That's it. Like because this is across the world. There's no place that you're going to be. I mean, yeah, you probably they might be able to put this on in Russia, and it's going to be sketchy as hell. They could put this on in, Angola or just maybe a random country on the map, and you can find a place where they'll allow you to bring in money. but I mean, we've gone so ridiculous that I seriously believe, and I said this originally on Twitter as a joke, UFC yacht in international waters, but this is pretty much the next phase. Like, this is the next step to have a battleship or a huge yacht or something where all the fighters live like they're sailors, and then they come up for a cage fight once a month. Like, that's seriously the next step that we're headed toward, and it's just gotten that silly now.
Didn't WWF back in the day have an event on a battleship? I swear I remember that because I think it was Lex Luger power slam Yokozuna. Yes.
Rapid.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. We made the jokes. The jokes went around on Twitter about Lorenzo Fertitta and his his mega yacht, because you get a $150 million ultra yacht that requires something like 30 full-time staff members. But I mean, that's such it's a question that I think probably deserves a lot of scrutiny, I guess. Is UFC 249, is this really happening? Is this really going to happen? I mean, because it would be a week after everything that goes on in other sports. It's been like a month long or give or take a month long delay to coming back around. So what do you think, Dave? What do you think? Is 249 going to go down on April 18th?
If I had to put my money on it, no. But look, successful promoters are successful promoters because they try to find a way to put on the show no matter what. Like I just mentioned wrestling, in the WWE announced that they're going to continue with WrestleMania in their whatever. And somewhere in Dana's head, he's going, if I can pull this off, he's going to have the entire sports world to himself for the most anticipated fight in just years and years and years. So he's going to do everything in his power to do it. And he has, in case you haven't noticed, he has a very influential friend in Washington, D.C. If there's any way for I will say this, if there's any way that he can pull it off, even if it is in international waters, even if it's on the moon, even if it's in Pat Militich's underground bunker, wherever it is, if it's somehow even slightly feasible to get away with doing it in a few weeks, he will. I just think, given what we're learning every single day, like each day is like exponentially worse than the previous one. So I don't think he can, but I also don't doubt that he will do everything in his power to make it happen.
That's something I saw real quick. I saw this on, I think it was either something he said on social media or a statement after. Is that 249 may not happen in the United States, ... So I don't know. Ant, what do you got?
Well, I think it's notable too. I mean, Dave mentioned the friendship between Donald Trump and Dana White. They were ready to go ahead with that Oklahoma show in the middle of nowhere until the press conference today, where the coronavirus task force said that no more than 10 people should be in the same room. So that just means, okay, you need a couple of cameramen, you need 3 judges, you need 2 fighters, they have cornermen. So that just mean if they said the number was 20, all right, we're going to squeeze it, we're going to make it work. But now, unless you narrow it down to judges watching remotely, a referee, and 2 fighters, and the corners radioing in instructions over a PA system, you pretty much don't have the capacity to run a fight. And I also think it's telling too that they're willing to, and no disrespect to the fighters that are trying to step up, as foolish as that might be for long-term health, These guys are trying to step up for UFC opportunities, but a lot of them aren't in the UFC for a reason. So you're kind of scraping along what's left in the MMA world to try to fill in cards just to say, hey, we have a card running, and the qualities of the quality of the fights would have to suffer. I'll give credit to your boss, Dave, Simon Simano, who tweeted out like the quality of the fights would certainly suffer. So why are they pushing forward with this agenda?
Yeah, and you know what? When I heard about, the way they were trying to pretty much like, anyone who's ever been in a bar fight in their life can come fight next week. So I'm a little bit older than you guys. I'm 40 years old. You don't need to know the actual number, but I'm old enough that I actually remember when the NFL went ahead with scab football during I think it was strike in 1987, and it was horrible football. It was like train wreck entertaining for a week or two, but eventually the quality of all these like semi-pro guys and Division III guys playing on NFL football fields was so bad that the league had to cave in and make a new deal. Or just remember when the replacement refs in the NFL.
Man.
It's such short-sighted thinking that the UFC thinks that they can just slap those three letters out there.
It's a brand.
And they have a lot of proof that backs them up. But I think in this case, in the long run, if you just had, anyone that you could find walk in off the street and do it, have a card with like 15 CM Punks, I guess, then, it would be more damaging in the long run, even though they've managed to get through that one evening.
All right, Duffy, what do you think, man? I don't know if your video's not working, but I think you can hear us. What do you think about the UFC trying to basically have a UFC desperation fight night where fighters that if they had a win, they were in the United States and they could make anywhere from bantamweight to welterweight, I believe was the criteria. If you can make weight and you think there's a guy that either fought in the UFC or is fighting in the UFC or wants to fight in the UFC or whatever it may have been, what do you think about that? You think that idea makes sense?
I think that idea is called Dana White's Contender Series.
Yeah.
I mean, just so you guys literally can't see me.
No, we're good.
We can see you.
Okay. Here's the thing, because like Dave, I am in my 40s. I remember the scab season, and the reason the UFC or the reason the NFL pushed forward then is a lot of the same reason the UFC wants so desperately to push forward now. To a certain extent, the three letters are what matters, because they could put me in the octagon. And if it says UFC on the floor and it's airing on ESPN, they have a certain amount of guaranteed money that's coming in. And a huge hat tip to SureDog's Patrick Auger, kind of our resident business analyst guy for this, but he pointed out that the UFC's ticket price, like the price for which they were purchased, and we all know the number, $4.2 billion, represents about 80% of Endeavor's total debt. Also, the UFC is the only property they have that generates enough cash flow to make the interest payments on that debt. So in a very real sense, Endeavor is living from paycheck to paycheck, just like a lot of us are. They are desperate not to cancel those shows for that reason. And that's why they just put out the call. And we got this amusing cross-section of has-beens, never-weres, wannabes trying to step up and use it as their chance. And it was funny, but it was also sad. Just the extent to which fighters want to fight so badly, want to be great so badly, want to, grab that brass ring, that they are just literally willing to grab the crumbs. And, so sad and funny at the same time. But the UFC's motivation in this is clear, because the three letters are all that matters in terms of an immediate cash flow sense.
What do you think, Ant? You got any last thoughts on that while you have a free moment?
I think Pat Auger hit that right on the head. Another shout out to Matt Wells of Slip and Dip podcast, who we had a DM conversation where he said kind of the same thing. It's like, how much is this business that Endeavor needs at this point? And obviously they have a huge amount of debt. Obviously this has caused a lot of problems as far as how watered down the cards are, why we have a UFC every single weekend, and they're just kind of pulling fighters from everywhere in general. So now you add a global pandemic and some of these same sort of financial concerns, and then you have the opportunity to be the only show in town. I think that's a big factor. And I mean, I had a conversation with the MMA manager who shall remain nameless, but he, I asked him, like, have your fighters been offered anything on short notice? And he said, like, he had some of them had stepped up and said they were ready to go, and he had solicited some names to the matchmakers, and when we were discussing sort of the ethics behind that and whether or not this was morally the right thing to do, he said, hey, like, people will watch, like, they will still watch. And the sad part about it is, as much as we can talk bad about it, and I think we should rake them over the coals for this sort of just flippant, arrogant, and just downright dangerous thinking and path that they're on. We're still going to watch it if it's there. We're still going to look at it. And this is sort of the same argument we've had before when we talk about racism in promotion. We've talked about fighters getting screwed over. We've talked about so many horrible things about this sport and how the business of mixed martial arts, in particular the UFC, are run. Yet we always tune in when it's on. I don't, forgive me if I sound like I'm standing on a soapbox, because that's not my intention. But I do think it's time for some self-reflection, and I definitely want to say that self-reflection should become should be rather damning if you are one of the local members of the stupid committee that we have to deal with on a regular basis. It's just like these complete morons that seem to think the only thing that matters is a fight. I am stunned at that idea. Now, while we are literally dealing with a situation that could change the trajectory of the world and our lives as we know it, like, the only thing I really care about is this little dude right here. That's the only thing that really matters to me at the end of the day. These fighters have little dudes just like this. These staff members of the UFC have little dudes just like this. I mean, I'll just say this. I'll say this before I step off of my podium here. Now, for all this posturing about the fights are going to go on and the UFC train keeps rolling and we're doing this and we're doing that, didn't see Dana White in Brazil this weekend. He wasn't there. Nope. Haven't seen him at the desk on SportsCenter. He's been phoning in from the safety and relative comfort of his imported snow in Las Vegas. So I can't exactly, if I'm a member of the UFC staff or if I'm one of the fighters, yes, I understand you have financial concerns and you want this money. And we all do. We all have financial concerns and are worried about our money as this disaster is ongoing. But man, if the boss is sending you out there to risk it all, why isn't he out there risking it all? Just food for thought.
Bars.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably about as good of a time as any to make a sort of a clever segue, because there were fights that happened this past weekend. There were guys risking it all to put money on the table for their little guys or their little girls or whomever they have. So we did have some notable events that I guess are worth talking about. I mean, I say I guess because you look at the scheme of things, it's so muted compared to the literal pandemic that's across the planet. But Charles Oliveira, who prevailed in the main event over Kevin Lee, he tapped him out in the third round with a guillotine choke. It's his 7th win in a row, and he's finished all 7 opponents, it's a pretty impressive stat. I could throw stats at you, but I'm going to spare you. So I guess I'll ask you this, and I guess I'll start with Dave for now. Do you think that Charles Oliveira, with his win over Kevin Lee, did that win kind of put him over that hump that he's had, because he's always been known as a fighter who doesn't make it past the top 10 guys. You think of the top 10 guys that beat Holloway and Swanson and Cerrone that have beaten him. They never quite had that win. Do you think he finally got that win?
So I feel like Charles's missteps earlier in his UFC tenure have been always been kind of like this little cloud that has been over his head, right? You go back to when he was a featherweight, and he was a ridiculously talented featherweight, but he kept missing weight and kept stubbornly staying at featherweight, despite everyone kind of screaming at him, go to lightweight. Then he goes to lightweight and you start winning. And I forget which fight he was, but it was a really impressive performance. And he got in the fight and said, yeah, I want to go back to featherweight. And
no.
It was just so frustrating that he was so clearly talented, but it just seemed like his head wasn't there. And I think we all, I kind of mentally said to myself, this guy's going to hit a certain level. He's going to be entertaining, but he's never going to be a serious title contender. And I mean, I think he's finally shedding that. I think he has finally put together so many wins in a row. He's left Royce Gracie's submission record in his dust pretty much by this stage. And he's not just this one-trick pony with the submissions anymore. You saw the way he took it to Kevin Lee in the stand-up. At the very least, he's finally earned that position where he should be fighting one of the big boys in the deepest division once and for all, so that we know whether he is going to break into that just top tier.
Yeah, I mean, the first round alone, he landed 3 flying head kicks, and he landed them. He actually connected with them. That's the kind of thing you only see Fabricio Verdun start off his fight and land it, and you go, oh my God, he actually hit that thing. So Duffy, what do you think? Is this the kind of win that he's been always needing? And I'll kind of add to that, because something Dave mentioned. Do you see Oliveira ever fighting for a title?
Yes. I'm picking up what Dave is putting down big time, and I will be the first to admit that I prematurely categorized and pigeonholed Charles Oliveira. Based on what he did in, 2013, 2014, 2015, I put him into 2 pigeonholes, both of which are hard to get out of. One, I pigeonholed him as a one-trick pony, and that one is escapable. I mean, there are guys that add whole new skill sets to their game after age 30 or after 20 fights or whatever. That it's doable. It's hard, but it's doable. I also pigeonholed him as a head case. People don't generally get out of that one. Like the bizarre weight misses where he'd miss weight by 9 pounds, and then the next time he'd come in like 3 pounds under. Like just bizarre stuff. And then, the weird phantom esophagus injury. It was on this very show a week or 2 ago that I said that for a long time he was on my top 10 list of scream at the TV fighters. Or just winning or losing, I'd be screaming at the TV when he was on. I've had to revisit that. I've had to, learn new things about this guy because, he's on a hell of a streak and there's no smoke and mirrors to it. He has been outperforming just increasingly challenging competition to the point where he just absolutely outclassed a top 10 fighter this time around. He is on a 7-fight win streak. And if you are a head case, one of the hardest things to do is string wins together because some weird shit could happen at any moment. He's clearly past that. I hope he gets a title shot in spite of everything. He's not that old. Is he 32?
30.
God, he's only 30. That's right. He was ultra young when he came to the UFC. And I mean, would anybody be super mad if like a few little injury things here and there like slotted him into a title shot sometime this year just because he was the guy available? It wouldn't be laughable. It wouldn't be terrible. I mean, how many guys in the lightweight division are on a 7-fight win streak? Ferguson.
2.
Yeah. And well, presumably this would be against Ferguson or Khabib. So,
one when that happens.
Yeah, hopefully it's after they fight each other and not because one or the other of them got injured. But anyway, a huge turnaround, and I am finally a believer in Charles the Bronx. Long way to say a short thing.
Well, so Ant, yeah, I'm curious your thoughts. First of all, are you down with what they're saying that this is that win, this is the one that finally put him past that to the next level of his game, and we talk about it because Dave, mentioned it. He blew by Royce Gracie's submission record. He's up to 14 now, which is just unheard of. But he's never won a title, never fought for a title. Where do you stack him up against other guys that haven't won a UFC belt before?
You mean all time or just
in UFC? Sure, go with that.
I mean, if we're going all time, best guys to never win a belt, I'm very comfortable with putting him in my top 10.
Mm-hmm.
Top 5 might be a bit of a stretch right now, and I think as much as I respect the Kevin Lee win, I want to see one more signature win from Duke Bronx before I'm really ready to fully give him his roses, and that's because we've had those same questions about Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee has been another guy who's missed weight, a couple of missed weight for this fight, has bounced between wins and losses at odd times, and seemed to have made very puzzling decisions in the cage. So I want to see him get a good win over someone who appears to be more stable in their career before I'm fully ready to jump on board. But as far as his prospects for a title shot, I think the only thing that would stop him at this point is just how crowded the field is. He fits the criteria as far as what you want to see, and I haven't even looked at the rankings, but I'm sure a win over Kevin Lee boosted him up pretty damn high. So he would fit in the ranking category. He would be a guy who's on a good enough win streak where you say, hey, this might deserve some title consideration. An exciting style as well. So as far as the fan service quota that needs to be met these days, yeah, he fits the bill. So I'm very curious to what he looks like against some of the more elite opposition at lightweight, and quite frankly, some of the more stable opposition at lightweight. I want to see him against a Dustin Poirier, and see what that combination looks like. I want to see him against a Paul Felder. I want to see these sort of things just to have a full accounting for what he can offer.
Yeah, it's a good point, because that was kind of, I don't want to say it was conventional wisdom against him, but one of the things I wrote in the betting odds analysis piece before the event is historically he has struggled against guys that push the pace. Every fighter, basically in the top 5 at lightweight, that's what they do. They will run you ragged. I mean, think of the guys: Khabib, Tony, Poirier, Gaethje, Conor if he's in the top 5. And Cerrone is the only one who doesn't. And I wouldn't mind seeing that run back again. Just kind of, circling back on this, what do you think, Dave? Where do you put Oliveira among the all-time guys that haven't won a belt? Is he worthy of any recognition that way?
I think if I was putting that list together, he'd be on like my honorable mention or other received votes list. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I agree with what Ant said earlier. Like, one more signature win ahead of Kevin Lee, and I would put him on that list.
So thinking about Kevin Lee after his fight, and this is kind of a tough thing to hear what fighters say right after losing a fight, because a lot of them say things they may not mean, they may not have thought it through, whatever it may be. Kevin Lee claimed after the fight that he may take a few years off. So here's the swing or miss question, and Duffy, we'll start with you. Swing or miss, will we see Kevin Lee again in the next 12 months?
Yes, we'll see Kevin Lee in the next 12 months. This is not a criticism. It's something I love about him, in spite of all his flaws. He's an emotional guy. He's an emotional fighter in the cage. He is an emotional guy on the mic outside of the cage. And when you put those two together and you have him in the wake of a disappointing loss, it's just exponential. I don't believe anything he said. He's 27 years old. He is still, in terms of his skills. Oh my God. Thank you. He is. I think this was his first camp at TriStar.
Gillespie was TriStar too.
Okay, so his second camp at TriStar. For us, a hobby is not magic, but if you're the type of fighter that he can reach, he's about as close to magic as you can get in this sport. He has too much potential. And from his own standpoint, he has too much earnings potential. Like, what else is he going to do? He'll be back. Like, far older, far less promising fighters on the tail end of their career, have come back, in similar situations to this. Even if we have seen Kevin Lee's ceiling and he'll never be more than that kind of 6 through 10 guy that wins some fights he shouldn't and loses some fights he should, that's still, he could pick up another 5 or 10 paychecks in the UFC like that, or get dropped by the UFC and pick up a couple of potentially bigger checks somewhere else. There's no way he'll be back. He'll be back this year.
You think the same thing, Ant? You think this is not the end of Kevin Lee?
And we have this conversation almost every week because some fighter loses and they say they're going to be retired. So I think at 27 years old, he's not going anywhere. He's too good of a fighter. I do like the version of him that we see at TriStar a lot more. I think there's a bigger ceiling there. It's just, I do think that even if he is damaged goods at this point, and I hate to use that term, he still is a guy that can put butts in seats and generate some buzz, generate a paycheck as well. I mean, I do think that we forget how instrumental Robert Follis was in his career, in his development, and to have that force gone when he was on such an upward trajectory, is definitely stunted him. And being only 27 years old now, like he's several years removed from a father figure, dying tragically. So I do think that once he has a better handle on those emotions, once he even matures just as a man a little bit more, I think his ceiling is still there. It's just, you just got to keep at it, and he is not going away anytime soon.
So, Dave, were you unanimous around the panel? Kevin Lee is going to be back?
So first off, I think we might need to do a swing or miss on, are we going to see anyone fight in the next 12 months? But, if we're going to be optimistic here and assume for the sake of argument that we'll be back up and running by Tony and Khabib, yeah, I think we'll see him. That would be a swing, right? So, I mean, look, we just go back like 2 shows and we had Paul Felder in the cage saying that he was going to retire, and he walked out back about 3 days later. And as both of these guys have mentioned, Kevin Lee's an emotional dude, that Kevin Lee wears his heart on his sleeve, and that's really like one of the most compelling things about him, right? Mm-hmm. Look, at the end of the day, I think like on Kevin Lee's gravestone, it's going to say UFC should have had a 165 weight class, because he's like the ultimate. He's like the face of that, right? It's plainly clear that cutting down to 155 is not doing him any good. It's showing in his performances against the highest level competition, and he's just not big enough for 170. I would have to go to what Ben said a little earlier. Like, he's definitely a guy who can stick around, who can have some exciting fights, who probably isn't going to be a champion in the UFC, probably will pick up a few bonuses over the remainder of his career. But in terms of what he was saying immediately after the fight, no, give him some time to cool down, and he'll be back. So
let me take a different angle on this, because in addition to that fight that happened, the co-main event saw Gilbert Burns knock out Damian Maia, who's now 42 years old, in the first round with a big left hand, and then follow-ups after that. So we'll come back to you, Dave, actually, because you were talking about some guys that say they're done and they're not done. Damian Maia said that his next fight is going to be his last. Do you think that's the case?
I mean, Kevin Lee's 27 years old and Damian Maia is 42. And I'm willing to take him on face value on this one, just because his entire career, and he's been with the UFC since UFC 77 in Cincinnati. His entire career, he has always been one of the most level-headed, every once in a while someone comes along in MMA who's like so reasonable that you're like, what's this dude even doing in this sport? Damian Maia has always been that guy. He seems to have a handle on on who he is and what he's achieved. And he's had tremendous achievements in his career. I feel like I'm writing his career epiphany in my head epilogue in my head right now, but they're just based on everything that we know about Damian Maia. If he says his next fight is going to be his last one, and if I'm correct, it's the last one on his contract as well, this is the rare case where I'm willing to take it on face value unless I'm proven otherwise.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah.
This is all of them?
I think so. Damian Maia is one of the few people that we can believe at his word. He's a guy who's always seemed mature, like as Dave said, just doesn't seem like he even belongs in this sport. He's a guy who was concerned when he defeated Carlos Condit. He was concerned about hurting him too bad. Like, this guy doesn't think like most fighters, and actually prides himself on using his jiu-jitsu to not hurt people in a cage fight. If this guy says I'm done after one more, then that's probably it. And especially for him to think one fight ahead. Typically, the emotional retirement announcement is, I just lost. I can't do this anymore. That's you have your Kevin Lees and your Alexander Gustafsson and Paul Felder moments. But this is something very premeditated. And of course, if it falls in line with his contract, Damian Maia seems like the type of guy that will want to fulfill that contract. And do you think Dave Feldman's going to give him a call? And if Dave Feldman does call him, do you think he picks up the phone? I just don't see it. I see Damian Maia happily teaching jiu-jitsu seminars, spending time with his family, and just being an all-around really, really nice dude.
Duffy, I guess I'll call a slight audible because I think I know how you're feeling on this. Is Damian Maia too good of a guy for this sport? Is he too nice of a guy?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm remembering the Rick Story fight where he squeezed the man's head so hard that blood came shooting out of his nose. Within the bounds of his skill set that he is comfortable with, he was always willing to do what it took to get his hand raised at the end. I mean, he didn't lose any fights because he was too nice. We're talking about a guy who popped Rick Story's head like a zit. We're talking about a guy who lateral dropped Chael Sonnen, like the guy had never put on wrestling shoes before. No, give me more. Give me more Damian Maias. It is Jordan Breen, longtime, Sherdog legend and current Bloody Elbow contributor, who called him MMA's Lady Bing Trophy winner, 15 years in running or whatever it is. Like, give me more of those people. Make it more of a race every year. Give me more Damian Maias. Nobody is too nice for this sport. You can be a decent human being outside of the cage and still be a killer inside of it. This sport attracts broken people. Hurt people is the saying, but you don't have to be. No, he's not too nice for this sport. But I do agree that he might well be done.
Allow me to detour for just a second here, tying it back to our brief conversation about all-time great fighters who never won a belt. Is Damian Maia on that list for you?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Just checking to see if y'all agreed with me or if you were wrong.
No, look, you're talking, if he had won, he would have tied Donald Cerrone's win record, all-time UFC wins record. And this is a guy who got to a title shot at middleweight, reinvented himself at welterweight, and got to that brink yet again. So absolutely, I would put him probably top 5 UFC fighters who never won a title.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible. In the way that he called out the opponents, he called out Diego Sanchez and called out Cerrone. So yeah, it could be entirely possible that I think he 1 behind Cerrone or 2 behind Cerrone. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he could approach Cerrone's record by beating Cerrone if he manages to get by him. Now that's a fun test, but you saw how the Carlos Condit fight went. Yeah, I'm with you, Duffy. Though I think that there need to be good guys in the sport to have a balance to it at least, because you think of all the BMF things and all the trash talks and all the animosity and the real and the fakes and all that kind of nonsense. And he's kind of like like the light shining in the darkness. Like you look at the division and all the hate and racial tension and anything like that. I don't think we ever had Damian Maia say a bad thing to say about anybody. However, and this is not about his demeanor, I don't think that his next fight will be his last. I think he's 42, and yes, I did make the comment in the SureDog.com Slack chat that he looks like he's walking around like Chuck Liddell is, he's kind of ambling. But I could see him going over to a one championship, another promotion, picking up a couple easy wins and some big paychecks, because that itch, to quote Uriah Faber, doesn't go away. So I could see Maia coming back and fighting after he finishes the UFC contract, but I don't know. Maybe it's just me. So I want to hand the reins over to Duffy now because I don't have the means to handle the rest of the hosting duties.
Okay, are we about to be surprised, Mr. Falcons?
I don't know. What do you think, buddy?
Well, I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss that segment while I was having connectivity issues. All right. Well, then we will head for the best named segments in not only combat sports media, but all of media, period. I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons, where each of us will share something that surprised us about the last week in mixed martial arts, whether it be something that happened in a cage or ring or some news story outside of it, just something that surprised us. And Jay, have you got something for us?
You know, I have a lot to be surprised about, and we've touched on a lot of it. The coronavirus really, all of that was very surprising, not just because of how the reaction went, but how the sport continued to an extent and how it didn't continue. But I guess if I want to keep it to the fight world, I suppose I'm going to go with a very unusual turn of events that played out in UFC Brasilia, where the first 9 bouts of the evening all went to the judges' scorecards. Now, that's a UFC record. It's only happened twice before that 9 straight fights have gone the distance. But the reason why I am so surprised, Mr. Falcons, is because the fight that went the distance that got that number there was Nikita Krylov and Johnny Walker at light heavyweight. So, coming into this bout, and I mentioned this on the SureDog play-by-play, coming into the fight, the two had gone the distance twice in their 54-fight careers, once each. So the odds were pretty good that this fight would end in a violent, comical finish, whether Johnny Walker flies in the air and hits a spinning switch kick, flip, uppercut, or Krylov gets him down and arm triangles him, and we go, oh, okay, he's exposed. Well, neither happened, but Krylov grounded him out, and it kind of exposed Walker. But the fact that it was such an uninteresting disappointment of a fight, it was a straight embrace the grind. Mike Goldberg was sitting there watching the fight going, I want to say it, but he can't. It was Krylov's the best game plan he could have implemented. It was brilliant. How do you nullify a high-flying striker? Well, you take him down and not let him get off his shots, or you hold him against the cage, whatever you got to do to wear him out. And he did. So I'm surprised, even though it was a very serious path to victory, I'm surprised that Krylov implemented it. So yeah, that fight did not play out relative to my expectations one bit.
I guess we can see now why he changed his nickname from the Fighting Al Capone to the Miner.
The Miner. I prefer Al Capone with his suit.
That was a hard hat and like pickaxe victory there.
It was only
needed. Yeah, he just needed a lunch pill, and that would have completed it.
Exactly. And if the little boss man is cooperating.
Yeah, Adonis, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons moment is coronavirus related. I mean, of course, the stands were empty, but I was so surprised by how little I noticed. I figured throughout the prelims it wouldn't really make much of a difference. We've all been cage side for a fight, and we've seen how the prelims are like a ghost town in the arena. But I thought, okay, main card time, it would feel like it was empty, and I didn't really get that feeling. The only time I really felt like, okay, now I realize this is an empty arena is when Joe Martinez is making the most dramatic of introductions, and it's just like echoes. So that's why I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons moment. It was shockingly normal once the fight started.
Dave, did anything surprise you this week?
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with something that I considered the only real pleasant surprise of the week, and I was pleasantly surprised when Bellator pulled the plug on the show on Friday, and for all the reasons that they stated that they did. You have to. So, keeping in mind that Bellator was the day before the UFC show, and each 24 hours was like a quantum leap in information of what we knew about the coronavirus. They were flying a little more blind than the UFC was just by having that extra 24 hours. So for them to pull the plug, they had the path laid out for them to proceed with the show because they were on tribal land. The tribe had gone ahead, their commission had gone ahead and said, yeah, you can go ahead, just keep the door shut and we'll go ahead with the show. And as soon as they gathered the information, as soon as we all woke up on Friday and realized, oh no, this is getting really bad, not only did they pull the plug, but Scott Coker went ahead and made sure that everyone got paid their base salary, their bonuses, the whole deal. And maybe it says something about this sport that you're super surprised when a fight promotion just 100% completely does the right thing. But there was something about last week and everything that was horrible about it that it just kind of restored your faith a little bit to be pleasantly surprised that, in fact, someone did do the right thing.
Excellent. I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcon's moment, and I guess kind of like Charles Oliveira, it's a case where maybe I shouldn't be surprised. I just need to readjust the way I see a particular fighter. But I was struck this week by the way that Max Holloway came out and spoke in the wake of the moves that the UFC is making or not making about the coronavirus. He sent out an Instagram post with an adorable picture of the little man washing his hands and a pretty lengthy set of paragraphs underneath it. And they are just, they're logically and ethically right. They're eloquently spoken. And I just need to reconcile myself to the fact that this is who Max Holloway is now. I remember when Max Holloway debuted in the UFC. He was 21 years old. He was a skinny little baby. Dustin Poirier ran game on him. And then, after that loss, he kind of worked his way up. But he was just kind of a really wild, young Hawaiian, just scrap type guy. He was not an eloquent or well-spoken guy on the mic early in his career. He just wasn't comfortable with it. He was really young. But this is who he is now. He is, a man who thinks manful thoughts and elucidates them in a way that very few other people in the sport are able to. And in the case of Holloway, I never get the sense that it's like a manager like writing this stuff for him. For one, there's too much like pigeon and slang in it. But I won't share the whole thing. Go find his post. It's on the front page of Sherdog. Certainly, I imagine it's on the front page of Junkie or MMA Fighting or the outlet of your choice. But let me just share like the first couple paragraphs. And again, this is under a picture of his adorable son, like washing his hands like a good boy. I don't think there's a doc out there who would say COVID-19 is more dangerous than fighting for a living. I'm not afraid of it, to be honest. It's like the flu, but 10 times more deadly. So what? I put myself in more danger every day. So for anyone else who feels that way, I agree. But I also learned it's not about me. I can carry it. I can have no symptoms like Donovan Mitchell, teammate of Rudy Gobert. Then I can give it to my grandma and maybe she doesn't beat it. Then what? All my UFC titles ain't going to make me tough enough to deal with that responsibility. And he just goes on to, recognize on every level that this is more important than purses. This is even more important than like his legacy as a fighter. I was stunned. It's probably the best statement I've seen by any like high level, high visibility fighter about the whole thing since this really became the only news story in MMA. So that is the thing by which I was surprised this week.
Max is on the too good for this sport list with Demi and Maya and
Good grief, yes.
and Joe Benavidez and whoever else you want to put on that list.
And
Wonder Boy Thompson guy.
Joe Benavidez also in your top 5 greatest fighters never to win a UFC title.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a real tough list now that I think about it. Getting a top 5 would be real tough.
I'm writing one and it will drop on SureDog this week. We got to find something to fill the space.
Hey man, yeah.
I'm about to say that's gonna be the next Walkout Network show is gonna be us doing deep dives into stuff like that because
I'm down.
About
Well, no, like Max Holloway, definitely a guy who, if anyone were too good for the sport, he might be, and walking proof that you can be too nice a guy for the sport and still do terrible, terrible things to people inside the cage. All right. It is time for, I guess I'm going to be flexing the authority today.
Oh, yeah.
All right. It's time for the speed bag. Each of you, I'm going to ask 3 questions. Well, 1 question at a time. And you will have 10 seconds to answer the question. And if you go over 10 seconds, I'll make a really obnoxious noise and cut you off. I think that's how this works. Let me just get my little timer here ready. And I'm not going to have a bell or dinging noise because I don't know how to call that up on my phone, but I will tell you to go.
I get the round timer app. I use it when I'm hitting the heavy bag.
That's what I
train UFC.
Oh man.
Bro.
All right. On this one, we will start with Dave, our special guest. Dave, in 10 seconds or less, do you think the beef between Brian Ortega and Korean Zombie is fake or genuine? And go.
Genuine. He's Brian Ortega. He's completely incapable of faking anything.
Jay, do you think the beef between Ortega and Chan Sung Jung is fake or genuine? Go.
Man, this came out of nowhere, didn't it? I didn't know anything about it until I saw it and I get it. Oh, yeah, this is 100% real. He slapped the dude.
Ant, fake or real?
Real, man. He slapped him. he slapped your man in public, in the arena. That's pretty real, man.
All right, and we will stay with you, Ant. In 10 seconds or less, tell me, would you take the over or the under, or the before or the after, for the next UFC event to take place by April 10th?
Ooh.
Go.
Yeah, right. By April 10th, we'll be lucky if life doesn't look like Mad Max. Let's be real.
Jay, would you take the over or the under for the next UFC event to take place by April 10th?
Man, what a difference a day makes. Because that's no longer even the question should be whether it would take place before May 10th. I don't know. Over.
Sorry, just you were the only person who's even come close to the limit. Dave, over or under for the next UFC event to take place on April 10th?
So I'm going to go with the fact that the UFC has canceled all their events through April 11th and say that no, they're probably not going to have any fights before April 10th.
Excellent. Okay. I'm going to take an audible on the last question just since it's been pointed out to me that, our whole timeline has shifted a little bit. Let's start with Jay on this one. Jay. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. Will it take place before June 30th, 2020?
Go or not yet?
Go.
Over. Ooh, over. Oh, no. I don't like that.
Oh, so that wasn't a dramatic pause. You were just actually thinking about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were burning the clock.
Oh, seriously? I was like, this dick right here.
June 30th. So that's a real tough one.
Yeah, just, Q2. All right. Ant. Khabib versus Tony. 5, or what should be their 5th meeting. Will it happen by the end of Q2 of this year? Go.
All right. In a just world, it wouldn't happen until like April 18th, 2021. But in the world that we live in, # UFC Yacht in international waters. Let's get this work.
Dave, Khabib versus Tony. Will it happen before the end of June? Go.
If neither guy tests positive for the virus, yes, because Dana White is going to make this happen, whether it's April 18. I'm just going to filibuster until you give me the buzzer here. It'll happen one way or another if Dana White can make it happen and these guys stay healthy.
Beautiful. Thank you for giving me a chance to go at least. All right, and I will get all three of these probably in 10 seconds total because they weren't very hard questions. The beef between Ortega and Zombie, genuine. Neither of those guys are fakers. Neither of them are kayfabe type guys. Over under for the next UFC event to take place by April 10th? Obviously not, as has been pointed out to me. Khabib versus Tony, I think it's going to happen before the end of June. Maybe not in the United States, but someplace where they find that they're able to run an event. Done. All right, with that, we will move on to our final segment, Buried Treasure, where each of us, if we choose, can highlight some story in the last week that we think should have received greater coverage. Maybe something that's flying under the radar, maybe something that's brand new, just something that you want to shine a little extra light on. And I will start with you, Jay, if that's all right.
Yeah, it is. In this scary coronavirus time, it kind of warmed me a little bit to write I think it was the only matchup news that I wrote up in the Thursday and Friday time that I cover news for Sherdog, is that the UFC is making a fight for the UFC Austin card in June. I don't remember exactly which date it is, but the UFC is still booking matchups. And the reason why this one is interesting is because it's Alexa Grasso. She's moving up to flyweight. She used to be a strawweight. They missed weight a few times to fight Ji-Yeon Kim, Fire Fist, as we may know. Now, that's interesting to me because after Fire Fist won her fight, after she knocked out Nadia Kassem with a nasty body shot, she called out Grasso, who was a strawweight at the time. So not only did she get her wish, but everything came together just perfectly so that she's going to be able that Kim will fight the woman she wants, and Grasso's going to get out of the weight class that she can't make weight at. So it's a win-win for me, and it makes me happy the UFC is still at least trying to make fights happen. I know there have been fights that have been announced since then, but in that little window, it was like, because it was just a nightmare of coverage, everything was shut down. Everything was over. Everything. So to see the UFC at least optimistically looking at June card and putting it together, maybe just that little moment of peace.
Ant, do you have any buried treasure for us this week?
Yeah, I got one. And granted, the person who spawned this definitely doesn't deserve any extra attention, but the reaction to it does. Your favorite fighter, the people's champ himself, Colby Covington, reemerged from the ashes of buffoonery to say that he was ready to step in on short notice to fight Tyron Woodley in this undisclosed location UFC event that has now been canceled. But while he was making this proclamation, he mistakenly called Leon Edwards Leon Scott, who just happens to be a pro wrestler, who decided that he is not a fan of Colby Covington in his mentions and proceeded to threaten him while also calling him MAGA Jaw. So it just makes me really, really happy. So I had to share that as my buried treasure.
Couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
Dave, do you have anything buried for us?
Yeah, let's go back to UFC Brasilia. I loved Amanda Ribas' fight on Saturday. I love that performance she had against Randa Marcos. Randa Marcos is a fighter who, even if you beat her, you don't usually look good doing it, right? She just has kind of that type of grinding style, but everything we saw she was just a savage on the ground. She was throwing all types of spinning, in the stand-up. She just completely overwhelmed them. If I remember correctly, she got 3 30-25 cards. So, and her interview was awesome too. like it, and the fact that it was in an empty arena. So I'm just going to go with like that fight, like, pretty high on her stock in the division. Can't wait to see what she does again. And that was Rail like on Saturday.
Beautiful. My buried treasure, obviously, the coronavirus has affected promotions both large and small throughout the world, with the exception of Cage Warriors. And anyone who follows my work or is a regular viewer of this show knows that, I cover Texas local promotion, shouldn't really call them that anymore. Growing regional promotion, Fury Fighting Championship in person. It's one of my great pleasures because watching live MMA is what I'm in this for. At any rate, I mentioned a couple weeks ago that Fury's flyweight champion, Jacob Silva, was picked up by Dana White's Contender Series for this summer, and I found that encouraging, not because a local fighter was getting shine, but because Jacob's a tiny dude who's never fought above flyweight, so it was an indication to me that the UFC is interested in continuing to plow effort into flyweight. He wasn't some tweener. Well, Fury Fighting Championship 43 was scheduled for this past Friday night. It was canceled. And I mean, it was canceled really above the promotion's objections. They only canceled the event it was after weigh-ins. They canceled the event less than 24 hours before, when the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation said combat sports events will not be happening. And said, our judges, our refs, our timekeepers, everyone's coming back. There will be no fights. And I found that disappointing just because this particular card was topped by two of the top prospects in Texas. At the top was Leomana Martinez, who is, for my money, the best prospect in Texas. And in the co-main was Adrian Yanez, a veteran of Fury as well as LFA, a guy that's 10-3, and his only 3 losses are decision losses to guys that are in the UFC right now, like Miles Johns, Domingo Pilarte. Anyway, I was disappointed for them because I was like, well, this was going to be their chance to get some national shine, and it's now postponed for who knows how long. Well, within a day or two of when the card was canceled, it turns out that both of them were snatched up by the Contender Series without even having to fight this past weekend. So, that's my bit of buried treasure. I'm excited, assuming we're having the Contender Series by this summer, to see some local talent that I've watched come up, get their shot at fighting the very best in the world. The good thing about the Contender Series is, if ever there was a promotion that was built for going on during a pandemic, it was this one, because they they do their show in a very restricted audience, like small closed gym anyway. So here's hoping that happens in June. And that's my buried treasure. With that, we will get out of here this week. Jay, tell the good folks watching the Walkout Network where they can find you on the web and on social media.
So on Twitter, you guys should be able to find me right down here at jpetri. You can find me at sherdog.com. If you go to the features column, you can drop down and you'll find me with a couple other familiar names on this panel. Well, obviously we won't have any live event coverage for the next few weeks, so you won't be able to see that. But there still will be covering news and doing odds and ends. I have a couple interesting projects in the pipeline I'm going to try and push out soon. So, well, let's see what happens.
Excellent. Dave, I imagine your name and fame precede you to anybody watching this, but just for the slow people, tell them where they can find you.
Sure. My Twitter is Dave Doyle MMA. That's my Instagram handle as well. And can be a little website called MMAJunkie.com. And it's like we're going to come over the next few weeks. So,
all right. And Ant, why don't you tell the good people where they can find you, even though they're basically watching your Instagram right now?
Yeah, this is the only thing I post on Instagram lately, is this little dude. But of course, you can find me on Twitter at AntWalkerMMA. Of course, this is my channel, the Walkout Network. And despite the fact that there are no fights, I know, buddy, I know there are no fights. It's so sad. We'll still try to keep some stuff coming for you. There'll be things to discuss as news develops about how the fights are going to be affected by the ongoing crisis. Also, of course, I like other things too. So me and Matt Hunter are talking about doing some sort of hip hop and pop culture show that we might add to the Walkout Network just to keep you mofos satisfied. And of course, check out the good work that my man Jay, my man Ben, and my man Dave are doing right now to keep you mofos satisfied with all the fight coverage while the fights are not going on. So if it's okay, Ben, I'll go ahead and sign us off because Adonis is about to melt even further. You know what you got to do. You got to stay beautiful. You got to stay positive. And in a tough time like this, it's very important that you got to stay sexy. I'll see you when I see you. Peace.